it going, everybody? Mike back at you with another edition of 5-Minute Gaming. And today's show is going to be one I hope that turns into something for the history books, because this is about the colorful story of one of gaming's quirkiest celebrities. And I didn't make that up. That was from the issue 119 of Retro Gamer magazine that I am proud to own. And I couldn't be happier to be able to discuss the story of one of gaming's quirkiest celebrities with my good friend, David Thiel. David, how are you doing this fine day?
I'm doing great, Mike. How are you doing?
I am doing great. I have done a lot of homework on this, and we are going to talk a lot about QBert, making QBert, and then play some QBert. And of course, this is a focus on sound. But the other thing I really want to spend time about is talking to history, because you were there. And I think it's important for people, especially from this point going forward, to have as many places to go to learn about games that meant a lot to them in their childhood or whenever they played it in time, because it's history. And this game is one of the great ones. And with that, I'm going to first start with the main creators of this game. And those creators were D. Ziner, R. Tiste, and J. Walkman. David, who are these three individuals?
These three guys are part of the reason why I didn't last more than about two years at Gottlieb. After QBert was successful, and this was the third game that Gottlieb Video Division had worked on, then there was interest, right? And so publications came, those game magazines and people, and they came and they wanted to know the story. How did this come to be? What was your inspiration? That kind of stuff. But Gottlieb was a rather paranoid corporation. They were owned by Columbia Pictures. Maybe by that time had Coca-Cola purchased them yet? I'm not sure. I don't think so. And they had policy, right? And their policy was anonymity. So they didn't want anybody to know who created the games.
Would you say that was due to them being afraid that these people might become rock stars and then demand huge salary increases?
You know, I think so. I think so. They didn't want us to get poached. They didn't want us to, you know, become a personality, a celebrity, or something, you know. So when we were in the magazine article and they were talking to us, those were the names used. D. Ziner was Warren Davis. R. Tiste was Jeffrey Lee. Yes, and I was Jay Walkman. And I
love that.
It irritated. I don't know about Jeff and Warren, but I've been an entertainer since I was in my living room when I was 10 years old, and we had the mighty Lowry organ, and my parents would tell me to play for the people who came over, and I've been doing that ever since. And there's a certain component, independent of making a living or anything else, which is, you know, hi, Mom, you know, hi, I'm doing this, and I'm trying to make you have fun, and I like to know that you know it was me, you know,
of course,
helping you have fun. And to cut us off from that, and it was stupid, and it, you know, didn't save them any money. I mean, not that we got that very much for doing QBert, but it was just dumb. Now, eventually, within 3 or 4 games, they reverted to a whole page, I think, on Mach 3 that was, you know, the list of the people who did it. So they eventually got rid of that policy, but not on the big one, not on the one. This was Gottlieb's biggest success, and they actively didn't want anybody to know who did this.
Well, it's the same with the story of Warren Robinett at Atari, who hid his name in the adventure game for the 2600. And then why David Crane says that he and a bunch of disgruntled programmers who were tired of that anonymity breaking off from Atari and forming Activision to then make some of the greatest 2600 games ever made. So it seemed like a very common practice for big companies to try to keep their creative people under wraps and out of any kind of recognition, which for the people doing the hard work and the hard labor, that's one of the most important things they can get.
Well, they had an argument, you know, when we approached management, and we had good relations with the guy at the top and the other guy, you know, the guys in the front line of managing the crew who was doing this. And then they spouted their thing. Well, you know, it's a team effort, you know, and if we gave you credit, then we'd need to give credit to all the people in the factory and the people who put them in cardboard boxes and yada yada. But my counter for that was, you know, the people who work in the factory go home at 5. And they come in at 8 and then they're done. You know, they don't, the creatives, the people, there are a lot of times I didn't go home till 8:30 or 9 at night. I put in 12-hour days many times. And then just because I left didn't mean I wasn't I didn't have sleepless nights, and I wasn't thinking about it. And I wasn't, you know, when you're trying to do this and you're competing with people like Williams and Atari, you know, you have to give it everything you got. And it's for that reason that, you know, I thought, well, you know, I think you can focus down on 4 or 5 people who really were the key people who brought this thing into existence.
Right.
That was my feeling. And, you know, I think it didn't really cost them anything to give us credit. And they chose not to. So, you know, some of us left. I was irritated. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Well, you weren't the first. Again, the story of Activision, it's documented that had went on more than once. So the way we're going to go through for a little bit in the show is I have prepared. I thought about this in the past, and I thought if someone wants to learn about QBert, a lot of people go to the Wikipedia page for QBert. I did too. And there's a lot of information there. And I even watched a talk by Warren Davis where he talked about trying to get the Wikipedia information correct. And even the Wikipedia itself was coming back and saying, who are you? And he says, I'm Warren Davis. And they're like, how do you prove that? And then they're telling him he's got to have his data factual. So that in itself, clearly he's even trying to get the story straight. But what I thought we could do is go through paragraph by paragraph, a lot of the making of the game from Wikipedia. And I'm going to read it. And then David, I would like you to comment on how much of that is true. And if it is all true, perhaps you can add an additional story about the making of the game, just to help set the stage to going back in time. And the result being, perhaps we can create a really nice historical bit of information people can learn about this game beyond the Wikipedia page.
Give it a shot.
QBert is an arcade game developed and published for the North American market by Gottlieb in 1982. It is a 2D action game with puzzle elements that uses isometric graphics to create a pseudo 3D effect. The objective of each level in the game is to change every cube in a pyramid to a target color by making QBert. The on-screen character hop on top of the cube while avoiding obstacles and enemies. Players use a joystick to control the character. The game was conceived by Warren Davis and Jeff Lee. Lee designed the title character and original concept, which was further developed and implemented by Davis. QBert was developed under the project name Cubes. So that's probably pretty correct and accurate, I'm going to assume, but is there anything you would like to add to that bit of information setting the story of how we're going to go through the making of QBert?
Well, it's close. It's close. I mean, yeah, at some point further along, maybe the project name was Cubes. When Jeff Lee came up with the character, he has that long nose. And he didn't, this is before he was hopping around on the surface of those things. Mm-hmm. And Jeff always imagined that it shot things out of its nose. Well, you know, what would you shoot out of your nose? So the original notion when they were messing with it, the game was called Snots and Boogers. And originally Jeff had come up with this isometric pattern, but it filled the screen. It wasn't constrained to a pyramid. And I think that was Warren's contribution.
QBert was well received in arcades and among critics. The game was Gottlieb's most successful video game and is among the most recognized brands from the golden age of arcade games. It has been ported to numerous platforms. The game's success resulted in sequels and the use of the character's likeness in merchandising, such as appearances on lunchboxes, toys, and an animated television show. The QBert character became known for his, quote, swearing, an incoherent phrase made of synthesized speech generated by the sound chip and a speech balloon of nonsensical characters that appear when he collides with an enemy. Because the game was developed during the period when Columbia Pictures owned Gottlieb, the intellectual rights to QBert remained with Columbia, even after they divested themselves of Gottlieb's assets in 1984. Therefore, the rights have been owned by Sony Pictures Entertainment since its parent, Sony, acquired Columbia in 1989. QBert appeared in Disney's Wreck-It Ralph franchise under the license from Sony and later appeared in the film Pixels.
I was in my office working on a game really hard, and somebody came in, asked me to come to the front office, a place where I never went. So I went to the front office wondering, gosh, what have I done? And it was some guy in marketing. He wasn't the head guy because I knew the head guy, but it was some guy in marketing. And he sat me down and they played for me a 5-minute episode of the live cartoon, the QBert cartoon. And so I watched it. And then he said, you know, what do you think?
What do you think?
Well, there are a couple things. First off, okay, I created the voice. I was part of the team, created the character. It might have been useful if you'd asked us before you went to the trouble of making the cartoon. I don't know what he was asking for, like my ding benediction or something. He said, oh, wonderful. Yeah. But I'm not, you know, I'm an engineer. I don't care. And I said, well, it's not what I would have done. I said, you know, basically, they had QBert talking almost like Bugs Bunny. First off, he was talking. He was talking real speech. what's that about? Had I done it, I would have made him like a Charlie Chaplin silent film. He's the everyman character. Everything bad happens to QBert, right? He gets hit in the head, Coily gets him, and he's going from one adventure to the other and always succeeds or not. But, and his non-speech stuff could have been expanded. You know, nobody ever asked me to do it, but we could have made a lot more interesting stuff that would be evocative and interesting, but nobody ever asked me. And, so making him this cartoon character where he talks like Bugs Bunny, I thought, no, I don't think I would have done that. And they weren't very happy with my response. And so they said, you can go back to work now.
I want to set the record straight too on Wreck-It Ralph. QBert talks in Wreck-It Ralph more similar to the game, but I was sad when you told me they didn't ask you for your help on that either.
Well, you know, it's been how many years? It's almost been, what, 30 years or is it 40 years? 40 years, right? In 2022, it'll be 40 years. And in those 40 years, since we created this, there is no entity, no development group, no film studio. Nobody has ever tried to consult with the creator. Nobody's ever asked. And I have stuff in my back pocket. I've had things on my mind. I still own the original soundboard. You know, I've thought of things that I would have done to make a whole bunch of interesting QBert stuff in the spirit of the original that I could have done, and I could have helped them on weird platforms. It's been, I don't know, on every platform. And a lot of times it didn't have speech because they didn't have the chip, but I could have suggested ways of, you know, making something. But nobody ever asked, ever, in 40 years. So, you know, I've always been irritated by that too. I mean, I wasn't going to go out and put out billboards saying, hey, QBert sound guy, you know, will make more nonsense for money. I wasn't going to do that.
Well, so much is about collaboration. And if I were to put myself as a fly on the wall in the sound design room for a big movie like Wreck-It Ralph, you've got a big, probably Oscar-winning sound designer. And again, is this guy going to think, I'm going to try to collaborate with the guy who made these original sounds? Or is he going to think, heck, I can do this and I can do it better, or I can do it my own way, or I want to try to do it and see what I can do? There's so many of those things that go on. And of course, they have the power to do that.
Well, mostly what they've done is they've taken recordings of the game and messed with them slightly, but they haven't really expanded on it in any way.
That's why I want to do this. I want to bring attention to what you've done for this game, because QBert is one of those characters that has still worked even today in these types of shows. And I want to credit where credit is due in the work you've done.
Well, it was funny. I was at a game show, and right at the time when Wreck-It Ralph was out, and they had created a Wreck-It Ralph video game, and they brought it to the show. So there was a Disney booth with Disney people, and they were giving out t-shirts. And so I thought, well, maybe I can leverage the creation of the QBert stuff into a t-shirt. I had a very hard time with that.
Oh, man.
I think I got a t-shirt, but I had to, you know, show them my driver's license, and then they didn't know who I was. I was just this nutty old man who wanted a t-shirt.
It's just a t-shirt. Probably cost him a couple bucks, but I'm glad you got one. That's cool. Yeah, I remember that game. It's Fix It Felix, and you can play that on the internet today. So the concept of the game, programmer Warren Davis wrote that he was inspired by a pattern of hexagons implemented by fellow Gottlieb developer and Mad Planets designer Kan Yamamoto. In a different telling, the initial concept began when artist Jeff Lee drew a pyramid of cubes inspired by MC Escher. Lee believed the game could be derived from the artwork and created an orange, armless main character. The character jumped along the cubes and shot projectiles called mucus bombs from a tubular nose at enemies. Enemies included a blue creature, later changed purple and named Wrongway, and an orange creature, later changed green and named Sam. Lee had drawn similar characters since childhood, inspired by characters from comics, cartoons, Mad Magazine, and by artist Ed Big Daddy Roth. QBert's design later included a speech balloon with a string of nonsensical characters, which Lee originally presented as a joke.
That's about right. Jeff worked with everybody. He was, you know, except Tim Skelly, who did his own art, but all the other programmers needed an artist. And so Jeff was instrumental in all the games that Gottlieb did. And so he was working with Kan, and this early days, I mean, we were still stumbling around trying to go, well, what's fun about this? What's fun about this very limited system that can only put 16 sprites on a line?
Sure.
17 sprites on a line, and the image starts to break up. So, you know, that was one of the limitations. And you didn't have enough memory to completely put a bitmap on the screen. So all those cubes and things are made out of little pieces which repeat, kind of Nintendo-like. So we were trying to figure out what's fun about this. And so, both of those statements, Con probably did take the thing that he saw Jeff doing and put it up on the screen and maybe filled the screen, and Jeff had in mind he just wanted it as a pyramid. I don't know. That one, I actually didn't see QBert until I was wandering around late at night, and Warren was huddled over a monitor, and I could see the orange thing sort of jumping around on it. That was really the first time I saw QBert.
Wow. Did you go over and say, hey, what's this?
Yeah, well, you stand around, you watch. I mean, that is the beautiful thing about a set of creatives who are getting paid to be in the same space, is that there was a lot of ad hoc, inspiration. And in fact, one of the fundamental elements of the game, didn't come from Warren. It was filtered through Warren. Warren took in a lot of input, being, his first game, but he had very strict ideas about what he filtered everything through his notion of what a design should be. So that makes him the designer, the director designer. That's what a good director designer does.
Right.
But he's open, he's open to all kinds of, why don't you do this? Why don't you make him fly? Why don't you, and Warren said, accepted some things, but I don't know, maybe the story of how the game really congealed is in here. If it isn't, then we'll talk about it.
Implementation. Warren Davis, who was hired to work on the game Protector, noticed Lee's ideas and asked if he could use them to practice programming randomness and gravity as game mechanics. Thus, he added balls that bounced from the pyramid's top to bottom. Because Davis was still learning how to program game mechanics, he wanted to keep the design simple. He also believed games with complex control schemes were frustrating and wanted to do something that could be played with one hand. To accomplish this, Davis removed the shooting and changed the objective of saving the protagonist from danger.
Warren had never done a game before, but he was projecting his will on this thing. He had very strong notions about, what's fun, what's not fun, and what he wanted to do. I mean, literally his personal development drove a lot of his decisions. He was trying to figure out, the programming involved, like simulating gravity and hit detection, knowing when a ball actually hits a thing and then changing the trajectory of the ball after it hits. All that stuff, has to be programmed. And that was fascinating to him. And so he limited it to the things that really interested him within the constraint of how they would contribute to a fun activity. And that's all Warren. That's good stuff.
Yeah, it sounds like what a director would be doing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, second section of implementation. As Davis worked on the game one night, Gottlieb's vice president of engineering, Ron Waxman, noticed him and suggested to change the color of the cubes after the game's character has landed on them. Davis implemented a unique control scheme. A four-way joystick was rotated 45 degrees to match the directions of QBert's jumping. Staff members at Gottlieb urged for a more conventional orientation, but Davis stuck to his decision. Davis remembered to have started programming in April 1982, but the project was only put on the schedule as an actual product several months later. That's a big deal. That 45-degree rotation is what makes QBert very hard to play today on any type of emulator. There is no joystick that can easily be set to that 45-degree angle without rotating it. And I'm going to play QBert today, but it is difficult. I will make mistakes because I can't do true 45-degree, but I am glad they did that for the game. Because I remember playing this as a kid, and it would have been much harder to play if it had been just a typical left, right, up, down. I don't know who the staff members were or what they were thinking, but clearly they must have been afraid of some kind of change, or maybe that would have been more difficult to build into the cabinet. I don't know, but it had to be that.
Common sense, the orientation of your motion, everything due to that presentation of the cubes, said that it was northwest and northeast and south. It wasn't up, down, left, right. And if you force an up, down, left, right mapping, it's going to conflict with what you see. And what could possibly be fun about that? That's more abstraction, and less abstraction is good. I mean, if it just feels right, you don't even have to think about it. I want him to go this way, so I push the stick that way. Done. And you want to use a four-way joystick. 8-way joysticks are notorious for, if you want to get the angles, sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. You only want 4 possibilities, and you want them oriented the same thing as you're seeing. And so, it was like a natural thing, but nobody before or since does that. So they thought everybody's experience with the joystick, Pac-Man didn't do that, right? But all of Pac-Man's decisions are up, down, left, right. So of course that, but this isn't Pac-Man. But you know, we're swimming in Pac-Man's wake here. And so people's experience, which is not that deep at this point, you know, how many years have there been joysticks that people play games on? I mean, not that many years.
Yeah.
So, but still, what investment that people had with this device was up, down, left, right. And that's why they didn't want to, you know, go to something, turn it 45 degrees. Oh my God, that's revolutionary.
Yeah. Change. So much fear of change sometimes, yet change can be so good. And so I don't forget, I have a little story to share just to break up this look at the history through the Wikipedia page. I loved playing QBert as a kid. When I first saw it, I remember playing it. I thought it was really fun. It was an endearing character. I don't remember the details of playing it when it first came out, but I do remember a very specific detail playing it in college. And the story is I was at the University of Washington and a friend of mine said, hey, there's a party at someone's house in Seattle. Why don't you come? And I was like, okay. So any chance to go to a party, maybe meet girls was a good thing. So it was at this house and they had a QBert arcade cabinet just sitting there. And for me, the first thing that went through my mind when I saw that was, oh my gosh, that's a QBert. Oh my gosh, I don't have to put quarters in it. So I immediately started playing, and I remember it was a very loud party going on around me, and I'm playing QBert and I'm thinking, this is so much fun, I can play for free. And I can't hear the game because the party's so darn loud. But after a while, it dawned on me, nobody was watching me play. And I realized I felt kind of like a sad loser because there were girls everywhere. And clearly I wasn't impressing any of them by playing QBert. And eventually I think I stopped because I thought, I better try to go talk to some people. But it was hard because I wanted to really just keep playing because I love video games and it was free. Just had to share that little story, David, of my QBert experience.
Well, I have a story about the QBert experience and something I thought that led to its success. So QBert was out and I was working on something else. And on some Saturday, one rare Saturday when I wasn't working, I was with my wife and we went to a mall somewhere that was far away, 20 miles away from where we live. So we'd never been to this mall. And Carol, we were in a giant sort of dime store thing, you know, it's like oh gosh, they don't exist anymore, but it was a big variety store.
Sure.
And it had a fountain, you know, you get fountain creations and stuff. It's kind of like a drugstore. So I turned her loose. She's probably looking at cosmetics or something. And I'm wandering around and I hear something and I go, oh, that's a video game. And so I head in that direction and I say, oh, those are pretty good sounds. Oh yeah, those are mine. Okay. It was a QBert. And so I go to the front of the store and here this kid, he couldn't be more than 8, 9 years old. And he could just barely reach the joystick. He wasn't a tall child. He could just reach the joystick. And I watched him. And what he was doing was he put a quarter in and he'd grab the joystick and then he would pull it diagonally and QBert would hop, hop, hop. He would go off the edge. He would go, whoa. And then this kid would laugh hilariously. Get another QBert character. He would do it again. He did it 3 times fast, laughing the entire time. Then he would put another quarter in.
He was paying to die.
But he loved it.
Yeah.
But I said, oh my God, this is why it's earning so well.
When the death of your character is joyous and fun and funny, you have a winner on your hands.
Yeah. I thought, well, you don't want to make dying too painful. And if you can make it entertaining at all, you know, you should always do that. Because
I agree. That's one of the things I remember about computers. Splat. It was great. It was comical, funny, and made his character even more endearing because he dies in a funny way and then he's just back for more.
Yep.
Well, this leads us to the audio section of the Wikipedia page on QBert. A MOS Technology 6502 chip that operates at 894 kilohertz generates the sound effects, and a speech synthesizer by Votrax generates QBert's incoherent expressions. The audio system uses 128 bytes of random access memory and 4 kilobytes of erasable programmable read-only memory to store the sound data and code to implement it. Like other Gottlieb games, the sound system was thoroughly tested to ensure it would handle daily usage. In retrospect, audio engineer David Thiel commented that such testing minimized time available for creative designing. Here you are, your first quote, David.
Yeah, I don't know if I ever said that, because the way I tested these games, I had an Apple II that I used for coding and stuff, and it was connected to the soundboard via a parallel port, the same way the game did. And so each night before I left, when I had code that was getting close to production, I had a little routine on the Apple that every, I think, half second, I sent out a random number between 0 and 255. That was the range of sound codes that the board could accept. And all of them weren't used, and I turned it loose. And so every half second or so, I was pounding this board with sound requests. And if you turned the speaker up, you could hear this just cacophony, this thing just going on. And I thought this was a pretty good test, that if I came in the next morning and the board was still doing it, I could be fairly sure that there was nothing that the game could do to me that would cause me to, crash. And we couldn't have that, right? These games were operated unattended, and an operator just liked to come in once a week and take money out of them. Mm-hmm. So they needed to be reliable. And at that time, there was this notion that certain disreputable people were operating these games. And I just didn't want to have some guy come in one day and try to break my kneecaps because I destroyed his earnings by having no sound for a week. That was in the back of my mind. That wasn't right in front of me, but I was thinking about that. So, I mean, basically, we tested the heck out of it. And so I don't think that minimized my time for creative designing. The thing that I would say was, just because every sound is an algorithm, is a program, that was, being creative by writing programs that move a speaker is very time consuming, because there's nothing very clear about what you do to make sounds with a program. I mean, certain kind of sounds, very repetitive sounds like a square wave or a triangle wave, that program's real easy. But if you're going to make a program for one of my favorite sounds, which is in this game, that program, I have no idea really how it does what it does. I just found it. I mean, I programmed stuff and headed off in a direction and said, what if I do this? What if I exclusive or this and do this and do this? And what does that sound like? Oh, and that's what I mean by found it. I found it. Oh my God, that makes a sound. Oh, that's great. I'm sure we'll play that sound, so I'll save that.
Is another good term for that what we use in our business called a happy accident?
Serendipity. So as long as we're doing it,
there it is.
There we go. This is the soundboard, and a mighty soundboard it is too. 4K of memory. Most digital wristwatches you can get for $2 have more than that. There's a processor on there, and these are, let's see, these are the ROMs, and this is the processor, and in the back it's a bunch of TTL that glues things together. Yep, that's the mighty soundboard, and I think that probably cost, back in the day, probably cost $50 to make that thing.
Wow.
Because transistors used to be huge, and they were expensive.
Is that the board your prototype board that you worked on throughout the development of the game?
Yeah.
That's cool.
I ended up with that. That's a QBert soundboard, and where the ROMs go, I have things that plugged in there and on ribbon cables into the Apple II. And I had a special board made that was a ROM emulator, so that a certain part of the Apple's memory space, I could write into that, and then whatever I wrote there, the game board would see that as its ROMs. So I didn't have to burn EPROMs in order to try things out. And since it was in the Apple's memory space, then I knew where that was. I could even poke things. I could change things on the fly. So it was pretty nifty to develop on, actually.
Yeah, you have to really put yourself back in that time and realize what you were doing was creatively cutting edge for the technology, learning how to work within your limitations, and also save money from, like you said, burning chips all the time just to test something.
The one number in this paragraph that's interesting is 128 bytes of memory. That is not much memory at all.
Wow.
And
that's a B, not a KB.
That's a B. That's bytes of memory. So a lot of programming practices that you would use, you need to use that, like stack operations and things, and using subroutines. You had to be very careful with that, because if you stacked up a bunch of those, every one of those used two. if you went down 25 levels, there's 50 bytes out of your 128 gone. Yeah. And you can't have your stack collide with your variables, otherwise the whole thing's going to blow up. So that's why I had to test so much, just because it was in a way a fragile system unless you were programming it very carefully.
Now here's the section on the audio on the Wikipedia. Thiel was tasked with using the synthesizer to produce English phrases for the game. However, he was unable to create coherent phrases and eventually chose to string together random phonemes instead. Thiel also believed the incoherent speech was good fit for the in QBert speech balloon, following a suggestion from technician Rick Tig. A pinball machine component was included to make a loud sound when a character falls off the pyramid. The sound is generated by an internal coil that hits the interior of a cabinet wall. Foam padding was added to the area of contact on the cabinet. The developers decided the softer sound better matched a fall rather than a loud knocking sound, The cost of installing foam, however, was too expensive and the padding was omitted. Do you remember that part of the story about the padding?
Warren wanted the padding in there to make the sound more like poor QBert hitting the bottom of the cabinet. The front part of this paragraph, though, is misleading and kind of wrong. Okay. It is true that QBert's voice came out of frustration of trying to produce English phrases, but not for QBert. QBert was never going to talk. QBert was never going to say anything understandable except for the two things he does say. In fact, QBert's voice was done before Warren ever started working on QBert. I actually had that in my back pocket because it came out of my very first game, because there I was tasked with saying all kinds of stuff for Reactor, for Tim Skelly's game. And I was trying to say this one thing, 10,000 bonus points. And it was a good idea. I thought, yeah, sure, it'd be fun for the game to tell you that, because it was a nice busy task where you were over here and the thing generating the 10,000 bonus points were not where you were looking. So it was kind of nice when you crossed these 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 thresholds. So great. And we had no tools other than a dictionary and a chart of phonemes. And I worked and worked and worked on it. And what it wanted to say was 10,000 bogus points. And that's not the same. And so people would come into the lab and I would play for them what I was working on, and they would go, "What are bogus points?" Go away. So I would work on it some more. I worked on this for like 3 days, just this one phrase. And you think you're getting it. It's called habituation. Yeah. You think you're getting it the more you work on something, right? And then somebody would come in and I'd play it for him. And what are bogus points? And I just like, go away. So I was extremely frustrated at this point. I mean, it was a frustrating task. So it just decided, well, what would it be like if I, instead of working so hard trying to pick these numbers to choose phonemes to have it say something, what if I just threw random numbers at the chip? I have a random number generator that I wrote, and I just give it some random numbers. What does that sound like? I mean, it wouldn't be anything useful, but I thought, well, I'm done for today. What can I do now? And of course, it instantly sounded like that. It sounded like QBert. And I thought, wow, this is great, because you have no expectation of understanding it. It's the best thing this chip makes. And then I, elaborated the routine to, send 5 numbers or 3 numbers, or I also had a pitch control on it, so I could take it down, make low voices and high voices and middle voices. And I thought, wow, okay, this is cool. And then I went back to, I eventually just did 10,000 points. I just lost bogus.
Apparently the g part was just too pronounced, I guess, and you couldn't do an bonus.
15, 18 years later, I don't know, how you do on the internet. I fell into a web page where some guy had the real chip from the Federal Screw Works, had a Votrax chip attached to his computer, and he had a development system, something I did not have, some software. And so you could give it an English phrase and it would generate the Votrax stream of bytes, and then give it to the chip and he would record that, and then you could download that for free. So I told it to say 10,000 bonus points, and it did.
Wow. Okay.
Not too bad. I mean, it still sounds, it's the Votrax chip. It sounds awful, but it didn't sound like bogus. And if it hadn't been for that little serendipity of my not knowing how to code these things, I might not have ever gotten frustrated and made QBert speech. So I had the QBert speech, and then I saw QBert on that pyramid walking through the lab one night. And then I instantly said, oh, have I got something for you? I have the voice for this character. And then, because the voice was like that, that inspired Jeff Lee to make the speech balloon. It's the other way around. The speech inspired the balloon, obviously, because I didn't see a goofy speech balloon and make that speech. It was the other way around.
Well, I'm glad that we're doing this show then, and we can correct some of this historical information.
Yeah, I've seen this page before, and I thought, yeah, this is bogus. This is wrong. It's sound. Close enough.
Well, that is it for the sound section. Now we move on to the title of the game. The Gottlieb staff had difficulty naming the game. Aside from the project name Cubes, it was untitled for most of the development process. The staff agreed the game should be named after the main character, but disagreed on the name. Lee's title for the initial concept, Snots and Boogers, was rejected, as was a list of suggestions compiled from company employees. According to Davis, Vice President of Marketing Howie Rubin championed as the title, which I'm trying to pronounce a series of characters that are unpronounceable. Although staff members argued it was silly and would be impossible to pronounce, a few early test models were produced with as the title on the unit's artwork. During a meeting, QBert was suggested, and a staff member thought of combining cubes and Hubert into QBert. Art director Richard Tracy changed the name to Q Bert, and the hyphen was later changed to an asterisk. In retrospect, Davis expressed regret for the asterisk because it prevented the name from becoming a common crossword term, and it is a wildcard character for search engines.
Howie was sort of like the marketing creative in charge. He was vice president of marketing, and he was really involved in wandering through the shop and making suggestions and stuff. And yeah, Howie's a wild guy, and they actually produced 2 or 3 and put them out on test with the swear bubble as the title of the game. It became obvious this was not a good idea, so they had that other meeting, which I was not at. Not because I probably was asked, but I have to keep in mind that Jeff and I were unique there. I mean, Jeff was creating most of the art for all the games, and I was creating all the sound. And of the two, because I was working with programming, I would say my throughput was probably less than Jeff's. If I could draw the sounds, it would have been faster, but I couldn't. So I was busy in my office, probably working on Mad Planets at the time, and didn't go. But a bunch of time, it was one of those groups, probably 6 to 10 people in a room. And, you know, it's lost to history as to who suggested Hubert, who suggested changing it to QBert. Rich Tracy did the art that wasn't video art. So the cabinet art and overlay art and all that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, he would have definitely be the person to change it from QBert and the hype. I'd never heard the thing of Warren. Sad because it couldn't be a good crossword puzzle Q. That's interesting.
As development neared the production stage, QBert underwent location tests in local arcades under its preliminary title before being widely distributed. According to Jeff Lee, his oldest written record attesting to the game being playable as in a public location, a Brunswick bowling alley, dates back to September 11th, 1982. That's my birthday. I was about, I was 13 years old then. Gottlieb also conducted focus groups in which the designers observed players through a one-way mirror. Boy, it's like an interrogation room observation. The control scheme received a mixed reaction during playtesting. Some players adapted quickly while others found it frustrating. Initially, Davis was worried players would not adjust to the different controls. Some players would unintentionally jump off the pyramid several times. Apparently you never had the kid, though, who was jumping off it forever, reaching a game over in about 10 seconds when you decide to jump off like that. Players, however, became accustomed to the controls after playing several rounds of the game. The different responses to the controls prompted Davis to reduce the game's level of difficulty, a decision that he would later regret. So, I know you're going to comment on this, but I have to ask you, David, were you one of those men looking through the one-way mirror?
No, I'd had my fill of focus testing on the previous game, the one that didn't get made, Guardian Argus. Okay, it had 4 different names during its development, and I went to them all, and we watched professional focus group people taking some kids through on a version of the game. Video games are one of those things you almost don't need focus group testing for. The best testing in the world is the most democratic is you take your game, dump it at an arcade with all the existing games, and stand and just watch. And because that's what's going to happen anyhow. And you have this ability then to just stand and see what happens. And, you know, if you could instrument that with a little microphone in case somebody said something interesting, that would be, that was one of the best ways of doing it. There's something about a focus group, the minute, and people know, you know, they're in this room and they're being asked these crazy questions and stuff, and it puts them into the role of a creative. You know, in fact, everybody can be creative, you know, go make a game, but you didn't make this game. So in the previous game, the feedback from the thing was it was a trackball game, right? And they came back saying, oh, we're having a lot of trouble with the trackball. We want a joystick for this because it would give us a lot more control. Well, no, very seldom does a joystick give you more control than a trackball. But the task, you know, made you feel like you didn't have any control, and no input device was going to fix that. So yeah, it was very frustrating to watch the focus group testing. So I avoided QBert focus group testing like the plague. So no, I was not there. But you know, and the result of this focus group testing was something that encouraged Warren to reduce the difficulty of the game, which sort of limited its appeal to operators. So I think we'll probably get to that.
Release. A copyright claim registered with the United States Copyright Office by Gottlieb on February 10th, 1983 cites the date of publication of QBert as October 18th, 1982. Video Games reported that the game was sold directly to arcade operators at its public showing at the AMOA show held November 8th through the 20th of 82. Gottlieb offered the machines for $2,600 per unit. QBert is Gottlieb's fourth video game. There's one more screen after this, but I wanted to put this there because I just thought it was interesting to see what it cost to purchase the game. $2,600, which, what would you say that would be today, David, in adjusted dollars?
Oh,
maybe
wow.
5,000, 6,000, something like that?
At least, yeah. Yeah, and you think, these things were on quarter play.
Yeah.
So it was not a bad deal. If somebody stick a QBert in a laundromat or a bowling alley or the lobby of a theater, most people have the misconception that in the heyday that arcades were where video games were big. Yes, certainly our video games were the feature of arcades, but most operators did not. They made their money by putting things on what are called locations. So a bar is a location, and you're an enterprising operator. You've bought your QBert for $2,600. You take your brand new unit and you go to a bar. Maybe you don't know this one, or maybe you do, and you take out a game that's not, making hardly any money, and you stick QBert in there, and you split the take in some way, 50-50 or some other percentage with the operator who provides that, 4 square foot of space and some electricity and people. Right. That's the deal. And then you come back once a week, take the money out, count it, split it, rinse and repeat. You have to think how long at 25 cents a game you divide. Well, it's 4 times 2,600. So what is that? Don't make me do. I didn't know this was going to be a test. It's about 10,000 plays, right?
Yeah, I would have to do the math.
So how many plays did you get a week, and how long before you paid that machine off? And then once you've paid that machine off, every quarter is profit.
I still have a calculator on my desk. That'd be 10,400 plays to break even. The numbers dim in memory. I mean, I used to see coin reports, right? We used to, because that's the real deal, right? Focus groups. I mean, after October 18th, 1982, these things were put in boxes. They were going out into the world, and operators and distributors would share coin reports, because when they show up to take the money out, they write that down. They maybe they have 10 QBerts, right? And so they tell you what that QBert did. They tell you what kind of location it was at when it did it. They tell you if it was broken during that period of time, or if something affected earnings. And it was a money business, and it was a public business. All this activity was going on in public, and nobody had a QBert in their house for a long time. That was the business back in the day, and it seems strange now almost to think about it, because there's very little of this going on now. You'll still see a video game or so maybe in a theater lobby. There's most of the arcades now are more like museums. The last page on the wiki talks about an unreleased sequel that I copied. There's more there than this, but this is what I thought was interesting. Believing that the original game was too easy, Davis initiated development of faster, harder, more challenging QBert in 1983, which increases the difficulty, introduces Q Bertha, and adds a bonus round. The project was canceled. Davis released the ROM image onto the web in December 1996. I have not tried to play this, but I will at some point, but I thought the Q Bertha sounded interesting to me.
Well, there's two stories there. One was that, they probably could have sold more QBerts, but because it was a little too easy and people's game times were expanding, the operators were experiencing diminished returns. And so, you see the thing go down, and then QBerts were beginning to get replaced by other games and such. Had the game had its original difficulty curves, QBert's life out in the world, making money, would have been extended. And Warren tried to deal with that by making a version, it's both a carrot and a stick, right? The carrot is, here's Q Bertha and a bonus round and some more fun stuff to do, but it is going to be harder. And so that's going to keep game times down, and it's going to keep quarters going into it. And so he was motivated to do that, but they didn't go for it. Back in the day, it was also very difficult to upgrade games. We look at it now, you just call up, here's a link to, an upgrade. Yeah. But back in the day, it was pulling getting your tweezer tool and pulling chips off and putting them in without bending legs and stuff. So kit, those kind of upgrades and kit games, I mean, it's almost easier just to, here's a new logic board with harder QBert on it. And those connectors are more robust than trying to upgrade ROMs in the field.
Right.
So given all those difficulties, management just decided against it. Oh, and what the other story, QBert, is my good friend, the guy who designed and engineered this soundboard, is a guy named Jim Weiss. He's a good friend. We were friends years after I was gone from Gottlieb. I worked in other companies with him. He had a whiteboard in his office, and that was like a place where for weeks during the trailing edge of QBert development, where people would come in and make more Q names with little drawings. So we had more characters. So we had Q-tip, and Q-Bertha, and there must have been 25 Q names.
Wow!
And they were all on his whiteboard, and there was some nice art and some prototype characters and stuff just for fun. These are the things when you have a group of creatives together, kind of fun stuff that kind of serendipity inspires other things.
Absolutely. Well, now we get into the creative slideshow of the marketing materials for the game that I could find. So first, it's just a basic picture of QBert with his swearing symbol or frustration language, whatever it is, you can make it your own. And I had to laugh when I came across this. QBert collects quarters. Somebody decided to write probably the greatest tongue twister I think I've ever seen in my life. QBert's causing quite a quamotion. Kids are quasi about controlling QBert and his crisscrosses his cubes, creating new quellers. If a quaggery creature collides with QBert, he cutely complains and quickly continues. And kids can't quit with just one contest. So coins keep collecting in QBert's quash box. Consider collecting quarters with your QBert and call or contact your Gottlieb distributor. Wow, I figured I'd challenge myself to that. But David, do you remember this at the time when they created this? Yeah.
Well, once it was making money, and they were so, we had this whole corporation who was so desperate. They've already had 4 failures. Four failures, yes. The QBert really was their 5th attempt. And now they have something that people want. And so they focused all the energy of Gottlieb and Columbia Pictures on this briefly. The licensing was nuts. They had 100, I've heard that number, 100 different things that were licensed. The QBert, I mean, baby blankets and little books and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, plushies. Mm-hmm. If I recall, I think you have a little QBert character in your studio. I remember seeing him there.
I do, but I'm wired here, so I'm not going to jump up.
The next flyer, this is more of a selling materials. The QBert Quiz is here. Operators love QBert. AMOA crowds took QBert to their hearts and made him the most popular game at the show. Everyone delighted in helping QBert hop around his pyramid, escaping the villains, and changing the cube's colors. QBert's instant popularity is testimony to his outstanding drawing power. Business loves QBert. Soon, QBert and his colorful co-stars will be the subject of extensive licensing and merchandising activities. A broad array of QBert licensed products targeted for consumers of all ages will build QBert awareness, traffic, and interest at your location. And this is the part that I usually don't see this in flyers, where they are trying to tell you why QBert is kicking everyone else's butts in the arcade, which I thought was very funny. They're saying here it's collecting an average of 310 bucks a week, and then they show a chart as to why QBert is at the top of the list, beating out all the competition. Do you remember this, David?
Oh yeah. Well, that's what I was talking about. Is earnings are everything, and earnings, and you can lie about them, but if you're not lying about them, then it's a very, if you're an operator and you can get legitimate earnings reports, you know where to invest your money and what you're going to buy, right? So, okay, so you get out your calculator and divide $2,600 by $310. That's how many weeks you'd have to operate a QBert at, assuming that it was, going to make that kind of money. Then everything after that number of weeks, you're just making money. You paid for your QBert. Plus, you paid for your QBert, so you can always sell that QBert to another operator or into the home or something once it's done. And unlike pinball machines, an old QBert, one that's been out there for a year. So, okay, Oh, I have a calculator too here. So I'm going to go 52 times 310. So if QBert's earnings held steady, which they won't because of that difficulty thing, right? But if they do in an ideal universe, at the end of a year, your QBert has made $16,000 on an investment of $2,600.
Yeah.
So, you know, gee, why couldn't we sell pinball games in that period? Well, that's why. Because, you know, the maintenance on one of these things is extremely low. It's really just driving to the location and taking money out of it.
I do have to laugh whenever a company is showing you the results of a test versus it being an impartial test done by a third-party company or a third-party outfit. Because when I looked at it, I thought, well, this is Gottlieb trying to tell you that they're the best, but I question things like that. I think, where are those stats coming from? How accurate was that? But that's marketing.
Obviously, a shrewd, somewhat cynical operator is going to question these numbers. And so the salesman, the Gottlieb salesman, is going to take the real sheets, the operating sheets, you know, that came from a distributor or a big operator, right? And said, here, they're going to let me share this with you and see these numbers are real. So it's not opinion, you know, it's just collections and math. But what it doesn't show you, you know, is that the curve, that earnings curve. You know, if it were across for 52 weeks, boy, this would be a great business. I would have bought a QBert, put it out there.
And there is a nice picture of the QBert cabinet itself, a beautiful cabinet, well designed, very colorful. It looked great. I remember seeing this in the arcades and it looked good. I thought it was a well designed cabinet.
It is. It was a pretty thing.
And here's a little bit of information I found about the who's who and what's what. Our hero hops from cube to cube, changing the colors as he goes. His task is to make all the cubes the same color. And then Slick says, although he's no threat to QBert, he changes the cubes he hops on back to the original color. And then when a purple ball reaches the bottom, it becomes Coily. This snaky villain chases QBert, trying to smash him. QBert hops on the flying disc to escape Coily and return to the top of the pyramid. Like his brother Slick, Sam makes QBert's job harder by changing the colors of the cubes he touches as well. This magic ball will freeze the board if QBert catches it. For a short time, QBert can hop around freely and try to complete his task. Wrong Way travels sideways along the cubes and stops QBert if they touch. Just like Wrong Way, Ugg travels sideways and is dangerous to touch. And that's it, the cast of characters for the game. And this is directly from the game on the panel itself, the who's who and what's what, also giving you some point values as well for these characters and what you can do if you defeat them, as well as the point value of changing the block color. This was a drawing I found. I was on the wiki page about just the early concept, and Warren Davis also has shared this too, I've seen. And that is the marquee. And with that, well, there's the game itself. DDT as number 11, we know that is you, from the default initials that are programmed to appear on the high scoreboard before people start playing the game. Any thoughts? Just kind of looking at this and remembering back in the day when you worked on it.
You know, you invest yourself in these things, and it's pretty intense. You make suggestions. Some of them get accepted. Some of them get rejected. You work with some really smart people, and the thing takes on a life of its own. And so I look at all these projects as like my children that I haven't seen in a long time. I haven't played. Let's see. The last time I went to a show, it's probably 3 years ago. They'll have a QBert and I'll play it because it's just fun to go back and do something you used to know how to do. I was never as good a QBert player as I was some of the games of our competitors that we had there to, remind us what's fun. So I was a Centipedes player. That's what I played a lot of. And Robotron. The Williams and Atari, I played those a bunch. But I obviously liked to play QBert. It's the other game guys that I play with. No, I've never been a Nintendo guy, pattern games and jumping. That's never been my thing. But it doesn't keep me from being intensely interested in developing them. It's not what I do for fun most of the time, but it's fun to see. It's really fun to see QBert on his own here. And I'm amazed that the simulators, they really do a pretty faithful job.
Well, actually, that lends to a story. I first tried to play this on the MAME arcade simulator, and the first thing that pops up when you run it is it says there are sound emulation problems with this game. And of course, for this show, to me, that's like, no! And they were bad. The sound was crackly and the wrong pitch. and it was in the documentation that it's bad. And fortunately, through RetroArch, I have a core that's called FB Neo, and that core plays this game better than any other ones I could find. So fortunately, I was relieved to just find a core that could play the sound correctly, especially when we're doing a show here talking about your great sound work. And before I start the game, I am going to quickly restart, and let's listen to what the sound is when you turn the game on.
Hello, I'm great.
For those of you who can understand Votrax, that says, hello, I'm turned on. It was a nice conceptual discontinuity that, you know, we have all the goofy QBert speech, and then QBert says two things you can understand. That's the one, and you only hear that when you turn the cabinet on. And then bye-bye, I'm not sure, is that at the end of every game? I'm not sure where bye-bye is.
I believe it's after you enter your name and the high score.
Yeah. So again, you don't hear it very often. You have to get a high score in order to hear it. So bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, the next great sound I read has been long talked about is that you thrilled a lot of the people at Gottlieb with this sound that happens when you put a quarter in right here.
Yeah.
That was a hit.
I always felt philosophically that the most important sound in that time that a coin-op game could make was the one in response to you putting money in the game. And that's what that sound is. And it's a rather obvious sound, really. It's the sound. It sounds like some metal, like a coin, going into a mason jar. If you can imagine inside the QBert cabinet that there's a mason jar in there, and that's where the money ends up. But again, as an algorithm, I don't know how long it took me, if I got lucky, or if it took me 3 or 4 days. I mean, I knew what I was shooting for. I was looking for some kind of metal coin thing. Like ideally, you know, now I would have a coin that hits a big pile of coins, if I'm being very literal about the event. But I wanted it to be unusual and catchy and like what you're doing. And, you know, at that time, so many of the sounds in video games were bleeps and bloops. Everything was just some kind of synthetic sine wave being messed with in pitch or something. So I came up with something that was kind of evocative of the event, and really is very sharp too. There's a lot of sharp edges on it, right? A lot of high frequency and a lot of motion and stuff. So yeah, I was thrilled with that sound. I thought, okay, I'm done.
Another reason these sounds are important, and I don't see this talked about too much, but I remember very vividly as a kid, often when you put a quarter in a game, your quarter gets stuck in the coin mech and it doesn't register, and then you're shoving the eject button and it'll usually pop up below and you put it again. And so that sound is a way of saying, yes, I have your quarter. You can play.
And then here's a credit. You know, it's really the get credit sound.
Yeah.
And, you know, we want to encourage that. That's the single most important thing you do. Everything after that, we don't care, but we want the money.
I liked that sound because it said it worked. It took the quarter. Well, I'm going to play some QBert, and I have enabled a cheat of infinite lives. And this, I discovered, is a dip switch setting in the game for operators, which was great. Otherwise, I would die a lot, and we want to try to get at least a little bit in the game to where we can see some of the other characters show up. So I'm going to begin my game, and once I start my game will never end because I can die forever. And the great thing about this game, as you said earlier, dying is fun. And the other reason I'm going to die a lot is because of what I talked about on the thumbstick I'm using on the Xbox controller I've set up. It doesn't register diagonals correctly. I have to really go left and right, but I will diagonal. But if I'm a little off, it'll go the wrong way. And this will happen a lot.
Yep.
So here we go. And that is telling me what to do. Change the blue to yellow. And there I go.
Oh!
The first of many deaths. And that was a controller error. And there's another controller error. I was trying to go up and it went off. So fortunately, that's a fun sound to listen to. Pay attention to what he said when he died, because next time it'll be different. And feel free to chime in, David, anytime of anything that comes
here
to
comes
mind.
Coily. Oh, yes. Okay, you're almost there.
Yep. Shall I finish?
Unless you thought you could lure Coily to his death, I think I would finish.
He got me. Oops.
Part
Part of me kind of wishes you could survive if you hit something in midair, but even midair, it's death with any of those balls.
There you go. Big
All right,
points.
we'll finish the level. I always liked that little jingle. It's one I've not forgotten.
And it was a jingle. I had written that long before I took a job at Gottlieb.
Oh. Do you remember what you wrote it for?
Yeah, there's actually words. It was for a car dealership, but I was trying to get a gig. You know how local car dealers have those crazy commercials.
Yeah.
So you get a lot of car when you buy one from us for a best use on a new or used car. They didn't buy it, so I had it in my back pocket. I had this tune, and so what I needed a tune for the successful completion of a pyramid, that's what I used.
See, that is great. We need that on the Wikipedia page. I paused the game on purpose just to listen to your story, so then I can unpause it.
Oh boy.
A lot more balls here. Got me. Oh!
Yes.
What did he say?
Just like car collisions, Mike, you cannot occupy the same volume of space at the same time.
Oh, he's right on my tail, but I squeaked away.
Oh, nice. Yeah, see, you get those. Uh-oh.
And this is wrong way.
This is wrong way. See, and he's making crazy speech, but it's much lower.
It is, yes, much lower.
And so you can tell. Yes.
And it's interesting when you jump on the disc, if they're close enough to the edge, they float away too. Oh, they floated away. Actually, they all floated away. I'm dead. Too many.
Oh, that was a... There you go.
So I have to ask, David, in your opinion, how is the sound emulation? Because you of all people are going to know. How close are we?
This is very faithful. Sounds very faithful to me.
That's great to hear.
The speech stuff is good. I think they're not emulating the chip. I'm guessing that they've just had access and recorded a bunch of it. But that's about as good.
Oh, no, this is definitely emulated. It's not weird. Well, these are not sound samples.
Well, then that's real good because the Voltrax is bad. Ooh. See now, I think that's Sam or Slick. Yeah, so he's doing that same thing, but much higher. And I was proud in terms of interactive sound. Oh, see, that was the sound.
That was the sound of a free QBert.
Yes.
There, I froze the...
Okay, this is a timer. You hear I was getting faster and faster. Oh, see? They're changing the colors of the things back.
That's right, that's what they do.
That's what they do.
Oh!
Ooh.
There we go. So that was round 4 of level 1, I believe. Yeah, now we're on to level 2. So now I believe I have to change them twice. Yes, I have to go blue to yellow and then to green. So it's like going over the board 2 times.
Oh.
Controller error.
Can you think, are there any other memories coming back just listening to the sounds and watching the gameplay?
I just remember how like crazy hard this got. It seemed to me to get like really hard. There you go.
It's always tricky too because that top space, they don't give it to you at the beginning. You have to go back to it. Oh.
Well, the other thing that I liked about the sound, is particularly the voices, was they were a nice cue because the voice would start just before they would come on screen. So they were a warning, a useful warning. Which guy? Right.
Oh, I saw that coming.
That was not controller error.
That's okay. It's so much easier, David, when I have unlimited QBerts.
Yeah.
No stress. Imagine trying to get this far on 3 QBerts with maybe a bonus life. I wonder if I can die. Oh, and I can actually go right in the same space as a bad guy during that freeze, and I'm safe.
Yeah.
There's a lot of talking on this board. Oh, and I killed him.
Yeah, you can kill, I think that's slick.
So I'm going for yellow as my final. I'm actually getting a decent handle on the thumbstick on where to go. I haven't made quite as many mistakes.
He's done a lot of good work.
Oh, they are. Hey, they're messing up my board here.
That's why when you hear that high voice, you got to get him before he messes. Oh, there he is. Get him.
Got him.
There you go.
You're right. That's a good point. When those guys show up.
Oh, there he is again.
I was just kind of trying to stay away from everybody, but you're right. They're messing with my hard work.
Yeah. It is a very smart design from Warren. I mean, and the team that came up with all the little things. I mean, it's in terms of divided attention, right? Some things you want to touch, some things you don't want to touch, some things it's imperative that you get them.
Oh!
And it's all, pretty straightforward. Just not easy to do.
Well, I think I played enough. We've definitely seen the whole game. I don't think there's anything else to come. So I am satisfied. David, is there any other stories or anything you would like to share about making this great, great game?
Well, this is the beginning of my career. This is game number 3. And I already had the heartbreak of working on something for 4 or 5 months and then the corporation deciding, no, I guess not. It's not good enough. And I think there are a lot of people at this point in their career they don't even get the chance to make a 3rd game or a 4th game. They just they tried and they run out of money and they go do something else. So I was very, very fortunate to be involved with Warren and Jeff Lee, who are still good friends and very, very smart guys. And both of them have QBert books or books that involve QBert. And so anybody, you can just use search terms on their names. You can find their books. You should support them. They very interesting. They both tell very interesting stories about this period of our lives, all of which, it was like new for everybody. This was a bold frontier at this point, because at this time, most of the major game things had been developed by the Japanese. Space Invaders, Pac-Man, and American game development. Warren is unique almost in that coming up with something that could, compete with the Japanese and be compelling. And so it was just a wonderful time to, be the right place at the right time with some skills that could be applied, and let's make fun. That's been pretty much my career, except for 7 years at Microsoft where the goal was not to make fun. I've been fortunate to pursue this, and this is the beginning. And so everybody who was involved in that, Rick Teig and Sam and Tom and all these guys, if they ever see this, I send out my very warm regards to having had a chance to all do this together. Ron is no longer with us, Ron Waxman, and he was a major force of nature. And I wouldn't have ended up doing this, or at least not as soon, if he just hadn't you know, he offered me a job, and I gave a 2-week notice at my insurance company. And during that 2 weeks, everybody worked on me and told me, "Oh no, you're doing a wonderful job here. You don't want to go off to a game company. Who knows what'll happen there? That's so crazy. This is an insurance company." And so I sort of wavered in my resolve. And so then I called Ron on Friday when the last day that I would have been at my insurance company, and said, "Ron, I don't know. I don't think I'm, I don't think this is the best fit. I don't think I'm coming." And Waxman didn't do anything much. He just said in his way, and keep in mind, he was a big man, like over 300 pounds kind of man. And he just said, "See you on Monday." That's what he said. "See you on Monday." And so I showed up. I just, okay, fine. Good. He wants me. I'll come. Because it was a giant leap for me. I mean, I wasn't working in an insurance company. I was a musician. And I had no idea at the time when I joined Gottlieb that I'd be doing sounds. And I wasn't for the first 4 months there. I was making graphics utilities on an Apple II that helped them program in stuff like this, because there were no tools. And so I was making tools. But when it came time, gee, it needs to make sound, That's me. So yeah, that's what I want to say. This was just a wonderful convergence of a lot of things, threads in my life and things going on in society. And I was lucky to be there at that time.
Well, and I think it's a neat threesome team you've got of D. Ziner, A. Tiste, and J. Walkman. And I hope that Warren Davis and Jeff Lee will watch this show. Perhaps you can share it with them. And I would like to say to Warren, you and Jeff, if you would like to come back and join us, we can do this again. I've got a spot right up there and a spot right up there. And I could put all three of you just like this together. And the neat thing about three people on a show together is I know what happens. One of you will tell a story, and that'll make the other person think of something that they'd long forgotten deep down in the brain. And possibly some new great stories about QBert could come out with the three of you all talking together. So if you would like to do that, reach out to David or reach out to me.
All right. Well, I will send links to both these guys. And yes, it would be fun to do QBert Redux, the cage match.
Yeah. Well, David, thank you so much for doing the show with me on the history of QBert. This was a lot of fun. And thank you to everyone who stuck with us for this extra long walk down memory lane for a very endearing character that is still in pop culture even today. And David and I have done some great shows on pinball. There's a show we did on a laser war, which is a brutal, brutal show, which I still look at it fondly as a great accomplishment in getting to the big jackpot. So please head over there. I'm going to put a link right here and go over there with us, and we can continue the fun and play some laser war pinball also from Data East. Thank you very much for watching.
Bye-bye.